Hi everybody, it's Sarah Cray with Let's Make Art, and I teach watercolor, and today we are doing a croissant project. We have Michael here working the cameras.
Well, hi.
And I know you guys have been asking for some more food tutorials, and it's perfect because I am actually going to France around the time that this releases, and so I thought it's the perfect little treat to paint. Okay? So we're going to be doing this project in 5 steps. Our very first step is we are going to do a light value wash across our entire croissant. Our second step is we're going to paint our shadow. Our third step is we're going to do a medium wash. Our fourth step is we are going to do a dark wash on these darker parts of the croissant. And then our very last step is a highlight. The supplies that I'm using for this project, I'm using Dandelion Paint Co, Tiger Orange, Magenta, sorry, I forgot the name, Indigo, and black, and bleed proof white, but I'm not going to swatch that guy because it's white. I'm using LMA watercolor paper, but of course you guys can use whatever supplies that you have on hand. Okay, so before we get into the project, I'm going to just go over a couple techniques because I really want for those who are like true beginners to feel comfortable doing this. So we're going to go over 2 important techniques. One is a value transition, and value is all about the lightness and darkness of a color. It's not about the color itself. When it comes to watercolor, how you get a lighter value of a color is you add water to it. Okay, so let's say I start here with magenta. I'm going to pick some up on my paintbrush, and this is a pretty dark value, okay? And then to get a lighter value, I'm going to dip my brush in the water a couple times, hit it off the side of the cup, and then just continue on. See how that's a lighter pink? Mm-hmm. And then I'm going to do it again. Now, the biggest problems I see that people have when trying to add lighter values is when they grab more water on their brush and more water, all of a sudden they have this puddle. And you usually never want puddles on watercolor because that's how you get really hard lines and peaks and valleys, which means your paper really starts to warp and paint settles differently. So really utilize your paper towel if that's something you struggle with. So I'm going to put my paper towel here just to show you how I like to use it. So I'm going to get magenta, dark value, rinse my brush, hit it off the side of the cup, and then I can just dab my paper towel a couple of times. Then same thing, rinse, hit it off the side of the cup, dab on my paper towel. And now I'm still able to get that value transition, but I do not have a puddly mess. And you can tell it's a puddle because you see that paint just move back and forth in it. Okay?
Nice.
The next technique, and one that's very, very important for this project, is a dry brush technique, which is when you have a good amount of moisture on your brush and you go to make a mark, it's a nice smooth line. But if you dry out your brush so there's not as much moisture and you go to make a mark, you get scratchy marks. Can you see that?
Yeah.
I'll try and do it darker so you can see it better. Now, I actually really love to use dry scratchy marks as a technique for making texture on my painting. And when you're painting things that have texture, like wood or, excuse me, flaky bread or anything like that, like a uneven stone, like mountainsides, all of that can benefit from using a dry brush technique. So what you do is you pick up paint, whatever color you're painting your thing, and then you kind of just hit your brush on your paper towel and let your paper towel absorb all of that extra moisture. And then you go to paint. The more your paper towel absorbs, the more faint and dry your marks will be. If you only hit it a couple of times, you'll still get the dry brush, but you see how much more that shows up. Mm-hmm. So this is the technique we're going to be using on our croissant to create that really flaky bread texture. Okay?
Okay.
All right. Now we can get into painting. And I'm going to work, I want this to be fairly quick. I don't want you guys to get too overwhelmed with all the things, so we're just going to jump right into it. But first, let's do our oath. So if you can raise your right hand and repeat after me. I promise to be kind to myself.
I promise to be kind to myself.
I promise not to compare my work.
I promise not to compare my work.
And I promise to have fun.
And I promise to have fun.
Thank you very much. Okay, so our first step is we are going to do our light value wash. So I want to make kind of like a really warm, light orange color. So I'm going to take my tiger orange and pull it to the center of my palette. And I'm going to grab a tiny bit of magenta. That's just going to give it kind of an orange undertone. And I'm adding water to this mixture on my palette, which is how I know it's going to be a light value. Okay? And then I'm going to take this beautiful warm yellow color and just start painting my croissant. Now, depending on how much paint you pick up, you might be getting some of that dry brush texture right now. That's okay. If you want to have some of it be a little bit dry in some areas, there's nothing wrong with that. And then what I'm going to do, just because I'm feeling a little efficient, is while it's wet like this, I'm going to grab a little bit more paint, a little bit more of that orange color, and then kind of at the bottom, excuse me, at the bottom, I'm going to add this kind of more orange color because a croissant is a three-dimensional form. It's turning away from us. So as the bottom is turning away from us and hitting the surface that it's sitting on, it's going to get a little bit darker value.
I have 2 fun croissant facts. Are you ready?
Yes.
Croissants are not from France.
Hold up.
Yeah.
Okay, wait, we're going to let this dry.
All right.
So they're not from France?
No. Vienna, Austria. This is all hearsay, but I guess Marie Antoinette, who was born in Vienna, introduced them to France.
My world is shattered.
Yeah, she missed them so much when she moved to France that she had the bakers bring them.
My world is shattered right now. I can't even deal. So really, we should have painted this when we were going to Austria?
Austria.
Well, you live and you learn.
Fact number 2, and you know this one, but there are 2 shapes of croissant. There's a straight one and a curvy one, and they signify if they're made out of all butter or made out of margarine.
Right, you'll notice that we're doing a straight croissant instead of one that curves because I'm an all butter lady.
That's an all butter croissant.
That's an all butter croissant, okay?
Yeah.
And I guess that's something that they shape them differently in France to signify what they're made out of. It's kind of like this honor system, I think. The United States, I do not believe follows that.
You're getting whatever.
But this is why we are doing a straight croissant because I'm into that butter.
Those are my facts. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk.
Michael, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, our next step is we are going to paint our shadow, and I'm going to use indigo for this, and I really love the indigo color for a shadow because it's a neutral with a blue tint and a light value naturally, so it's just perfect for adding shadows. So I want to make sure that my painting is dry. I'm going to use my round 12, and we'll list all of the supplies in the description on this video, okay? And right underneath, I'm going to follow the shape in horizontal brush strokes. So I kind of outline it and then move it to the right, and then I'm going to do a value transition fairly quickly. Rinse my brush, go right off the edge where it left off, and just do horizontal strokes. The shadow, whenever you guys do shadows on an object, the shadow is always darkest closest to the object that is creating the shadow, and then usually it fades or transitions out to a lighter value. The darkness of the value will indicate how heavy the light is. So it's a very strong light, then your shadow needs to be pretty dark right underneath. If it's a soft light, then you would get a soft shadow, okay? And then also our values inform each other as they go. So if I keep adding dark and dark values onto my croissant, it's possible that this value I have right here for my shadow will actually kind of disappear compared to how dark my croissant gets. So I'm going to do another layer of this shadow because I don't want to have to touch it again. If you do, if like while you're painting and you're like, oh, my shadow really got lost compared to my croissant, you can always go back in and re-add a shadow. I'm just trying to be proactive and see if I can avoid that from happening. Okay.
I've only been to France once, but I do love that you can buy a croissant literally anywhere.
Anywhere, everywhere. They're so good.
Like within 30 steps of wherever you are, you could buy a croissant.
I stop every time I see a new place to buy a croissant, I stop and I buy one, and I just carry all of them in my backpack and I snack on croissants all day long. Truly, like, for a day minimum, it's one of my greatest joys in life. They're one of my favorite foods. I can't get enough of them. I love them so much.
We should get you a croissant-shaped backpack to keep your croissants in.
I accept, yes. Absolutely. I need a specific croissant bag for all my croissants. Okay, great. Now we're going to move on to step 3. We're going to start putting in our medium value. So I'm going to take my round 12, or if you feel more comfortable using a smaller brush, please feel free. I'm going to mix a darker orange, which is essentially brown, if you guys don't know. I'm going to take some tiger orange, a little bit of magenta to give it that kind of more orangey color, and then a tiny, tiny bit of black. Black is a very strong color, so you don't want to add too much. Also, what I've noticed too is sometimes when I add black with like a yellow color, it turns it green, which is also why I have magenta to kind of neutralize a greenish black, which sometimes happens. Okay, now that I have this really gorgeous orange color, I'm going to start using my dry brush technique. So I picked up the paint, hit my brush on the paper towel, and then following the kind of, you can see the angles and curves of this croissant. So I'm kind of mimicking those shapes and doing this dry brush medium value. Now you don't want to cover all of the light value that we already placed, okay? This is basically giving texture to our croissant. All right? And now I'm going to do, if you look at our croissant here, these sections that are a little bit darker, that's what I'm going to paint. So I'm going to take that nice orange, and this one doesn't need to be dry brush. It's going to be a bit more solid. I'm going to put in these medium values. Now I'm going to kind of avoid a little section on the upper part of them to kind of indicate a glare. If you've already painted over those, we do have bleed-proof white handy, so it's not a big deal. And I'm being pretty kind of loose with my brush stroke. Again, I'm following the angles. And remember, if your croissant turns out a lighter color, a little bit darker, blah, blah, blah. I mean, like, all croissants are wonderful and celebrated and embraced here. So don't be too hard on yourself. Okay? And maybe a little bit of that kind of darker value underneath here. And you guys can decide how much of this dry brush texture you want to do. Like, if you really like it, you're like, yes, I can't get enough. Keep going. It just kind of adds. Just don't cover your highlights, because it's when you cover your highlights that you lose the overall form. Okay, now we're going to put in our dark wash. So again, I'm going to make a dark brown. So just, I can paint on top of this mixture I have here. I'm going to grab more of my tiger orange. I'm going to grab...
scooch that pan in a bit so we can see the outside colors while you're mixing? There we go.
Yes. I'm going to grab a little bit of my magenta, and my black is in this back corner, but I'm just going to take a tiny bit. Okay, you see how strong that black is? Look how dark that turned that, and see how it's turning slightly green? Like, that has a green tone to me. So I'm going to do an extra swoop of magenta to neutralize that green. Now all of a sudden, it's a really nice warm brown. Okay?
Magic.
So, again, picking up this brown, hitting it on the paper towel, and where there are the darker spots on my croissant, this is where I'm doing kind of a dry brush over. So again, just in those darker areas. Okay. And then this is where you can say like, this is a croissant, congratulations, I'm done. Or if you want to accentuate things a little bit, sometimes just taking a step after you do the steps to kind of like look and see what's in front of you and see what it can need to really like make it pop a little bit more. I feel like that is what I'm going to do. So one thing that I'm going to do is I'm actually going to take a little bit of magenta and orange because I want that extra hint of like orange saturation color to really, you know, when a croissant is like so buttery and soft and like a really beautiful color, I want to accentuate that kind of orange. So I'm going to mix orange on my palette and then just add a wash of orange, utilizing the dry brush. And you see how that just warms it up.
Increasing its deliciousness.
Exactly. Exactly. Like that feels nice. Like that is buttery. You know what I mean? Like you're looking at that and you're like, yes, I can feel that butter.
I can hear the crisp.
I can hear, oh. And then I feel like I can go one more layer of dark value on my croissant, just a little bit darker in a few places just to really kind of pump up that form. So I'm going to add a tiny bit more black to my already really beautiful brown mixture. If you need to add more magenta to neutralize it, if it turns too green, please feel free. And again, I'm kind of still using that dry brush. Usually on croissants, like in these darker portions, the edges are a little bit darker. So that's where you can kind of focus the painting if you want. And don't forget the underside. Sometimes it's easy to avoid it, but it's still part of it. Okay. That feels really good. And then I might do a couple, like just taking this darker brown throughout the croissant, not just in the shadow spots, just a little bit. Now, if you try and do the dry brush texture and your painting is wet, then the dry brush texture is not gonna show up totally. So sometimes you have to wait for your painting to be a bit more dry before you can do that dry brush texture. So I'm gonna give that a second and we're gonna add our highlight, which is our last step. So you can use a round 2, you can use a round 6, whatever you wanna use. Bleed proof white is something I always have on hand, and honestly, I don't really consider it a paint color because it's just something I always have ready for any of my paintings. It's essentially like a gouache, but a very intense gouache, which means it's an opaque watercolor, so you can layer it. So using a round 6, I picked up some white and a dry brush texture. I'm just gonna do a little white highlight to kind of show like that glare that gets with like shiny kind of buttery, greasy food.
The best foods.
The best kind of foods. And you can decide how white you want it to be. But just doing this little extra glare, especially on these dark value areas, it's gonna pop a little bit more. Okay. And I feel like just, my shadow feels pretty good. I don't feel like I need to really adjust that. I'm gonna do one more layer of dry brush texture on the non-dark parts of my croissant, just to give it a little bit. It just kind of smoothed out too much. But honestly, just doing a few layers of dry brush in 3 different values is going to form your croissant. So if, like, at its basic level, that's all you really need. And I will admit that I went into a little bit of detail here to make this really feel like a croissant, maybe probably because I love it so much. But you can keep this and not have so many different values and still have, like, people will look at that and say, oh, a croissant, you know? So, like, don't stress too much if it's not quite where you want it to be, because you'll get there. Okay, and sometimes just I like to do a little extra loop. And there we go.
Beautiful.
That's our croissant. So, I mean, you guys can play with this. You can have fun with this. I'm excited to show you guys more, kind of like more food tutorials that are kind of short and quick and a little bit more beginner friendly. So you guys, if you only have 20 minutes to paint or 25 minutes to paint, you can absolutely do a painting in that time. So thank you so much for painting with me, Michael. Always a pleasure.
Anytime.
If you want to share your work, you can join our watercolor group. That's called Let's Make Art Watercolor. It's a very large but very, very supportive watercolor community where people are sharing their watercolor journey and what they're painting with us, and then how that's turning into their own original artwork, which is kind of really amazing to see. And if you're on Instagram, you can tag us at Let's Go Make Art. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I literally have never said this before in a YouTube tutorial.
There we go. Yeah. Number 601.
601 tutorials when I tell you to like and subscribe. So thanks so much for painting with me. I'll see you guys next time. Bye.